In the last couple of days, I have been absolutely obsessed with gouache. I got this new set of gouache paints from Amazon and I painted this. So I wanted to show you in a very simple step-by-step tutorial how I painted this beautiful field of daisies. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Okay, so just to go over the steps in really simple form, it's going to be the first layer is going to be this very dark background layer. The second step is going to be all the little leaves in green and dark green. Then the third step is to add the background flowers. So they're going to be gray color with a little bit of like a dark brown for the center. Then the next step, the fourth step, is to add the front flowers, the brighter ones. So this is going to give it a lot of depth. Now, then the final step, I think is 5 steps, is to add the little details in the centers of the flowers and to add more detail to like the background layer. So just like a whole bunch of little details as the final step. So let's just get started with that. Okay, so for my paper, I am going to use this absolutely beautiful paper that I got from a person on Instagram, I believe. I got it a while back, so I don't remember, but it is super thick. I initially got this notebook because I thought it was going to be for watercolor because it's sold as watercolor paper, but it bleeds too much in the watercolor. So it's a great paper for gouache, but it's, I believe, cotton, whatnot, but it is handmade. It's a beautiful, beautiful paper. So I just take out one page, I cut it in half, and then I get these beautiful, like super handmade looking paper basically. So let's start with this paper. As for paints, we're gonna go ahead and use some of these paints that I recently got from Amazon. We're gonna use this little thing. We're gonna use some of these green colors, a little bit of the sepia, and I am going to also use some of the colors that I got from the bigger set of the same brand, but I transferred them into little containers because they were drying out too fast in the previous, and where they came like this. So basically I put them in little containers so they last a lot longer. So we're going to use this gray color, a dark blue, this really beautiful yellow, and then a white. So we're gonna go ahead and start with the background layer. So for brushes, I am using a large brush just for the background. I am using this tiny little it's like a filbert brush, but it's really small, and I'm using a brush by Monica Shimoni. I'll leave a description in the a link in the description below. These are really great for details. So those are the materials. So of course the water. So I'm just adding a little bit of clean water, and basically I feel like that's a good consistency, and so it just needs to be kind of soupy but not super wet, just not too thin. All right, so we're just gonna start with this background layer. So because it's looking a little bit too too blue, I am going to start adding a little bit of these green colors. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of this green just directly on top of the paper, really softly, because my paper is already wet. So I like to just kind of blend it in the paper in itself. And of course, I always like to leave my edges really rough. Okay, I think we are done with the background layer. I'm going to completely let it dry. Okay, so now that the background layer is about 95% dry, I want to move on and paint the background leaves. So I'm using my synthetic brush and I am mixing a little bit of a dark green as my background leaves. They will eventually get a little brighter and brighter as I create more layers of leaves, but I'm just going to paint dark ones and a little bit more light ones to give it a little bit of contrast and depth. So these are just simple oval kind of leaves, and I'm going to try to fill in as much of the paper but still leaving a little bit of empty space in the middle. But I want the leaves to be seen, so they cannot be like super dark. So I'm just mixing a little bit of a light green with a little bit of the dark blue, and I'm just moving forward with different types of greens. So now that I have my main background of leaves, I want to add a little bit of a highlight to my leaves. So I'm using a more of a limey kind of green and adding just a little bit of detail onto the leaves that I already have and they're dry, and that'll give them a little bit of a highlight. All right, so now moving on to our first layer of flowers. So these flowers are in the background, so we want to make them gray because eventually they're going to be in shadow, like in the shadow of the brighter top layer leaves of flowers. So with a dark green, not super dark, so that's why I'm mixing it a little bit with white. With a dark green, just paint little daisies, and this is just a motion of outward into an invisible center. So I didn't particularly paint the centers of my flowers first, because I just envisioned the center of the flower, and I like this process better because I don't have to worry about the paint in the middle of the flower yet. That is a step that I will do later. So I'm just going around in the sort of empty void spaces and filling them in with my dark base flowers. Alright, now that we have the base layer of our shadow flowers, I am going to go ahead and paint the centers of the flowers in a dark kind of brown color, because clearly these are in shadow, so they're not super bright. So I'm just going to do the centers of the flowers with a dark brown color. Alright, so now we are moving on to our final layer of flowers, which are the top flowers. The top daisies are going to be super bright and white. So what I like to do when I paint my top layer of flowers is to make sure that I go on top of my previous layer. I want to make sure that my flowers look like they are on top of the gray layer flowers. So in my composition, I want to make sure that I'm covering at least some of the petals, so it creates that depth field that the flowers are behind. So not only I'm focusing on some of the empty spaces, but also to be on top of the other flowers. Alright, so now of course we have to add the center of our little daisies, and this is going to be just with a pure yellow color. So I like to use sometimes a pure yellow, sometimes I like to mix it with a little bit of orange. It is up to you guys. So I'm gonna go through each flower to add the main yellow center color, and then I'm going to add a little bit of brown to create that shadow effect. So now I also want to add a little bit, a tiny little bit of yellow to my bottom flowers, because there is still some light that casts on the bottom layer. So I want to add just a tiny little bit to make sure that there's some light coming through the top flowers, and it makes it look just like that detail makes it look just so much more beautiful, because they don't look flat, they look dimensional. They're in shadow, but they still look dimensional. Now, like I said, with the brown color, I am adding at the bottom part of my circle of the center of my flower, I am adding the dark brown to really give it that dimension that really makes the flower pop. So I'm trying to go over like all my little flowers and make sure I get all the shadows in, and it really makes a huge difference. And now for the very last step. This is a very magical little step that it cannot be missed. Like, this is where the painting really comes together, and it's in the very last details. So in my experience doing this painting, what I tried to do was to think that where the light source was coming, and adding those little highlights in the bottom layer of my flowers really makes the painting really pop, really gives it that amazing depth. So with a white gouache, I'm just going really softly and adding highlights to my bottom layer. This really puts the painting together, for me at least. So I really encourage you to do this very last step and think about where the light source is coming and where the shadows, like the top flowers, are, where are they creating the shadow. So just add a few little highlights and it really looks amazing. So this is the very last step for this tutorial, and I really hope you learned something from it. Let me know in the comments if you have questions about the technique, about the materials, about anything really at all. If you have suggestions for future videos, I am all ears. So that is all for today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial, you learned something from it. Don't forget to subscribe and like so other people can see it as well. All right, I'll see you guys the next time. Bye.